So Rebecca, you just spoke at United Patients Group Medical Cannabis Conference.
I did.
You had a really personal story about your now 2 children and how you found medical cannabis as a solution to the situation that your children were going through. And I'd just love to hear a little bit more about your son. He's your firstborn, right?
He is my firstborn.
Okay, so just tell us a little bit about what you were experiencing and your journey.
Okay. My son is Gavin. We call him G-Man. He was a complicated birth. He had cerebral palsy, cyclic vomiting syndrome, a seizure disorder. And he was on Keppra for about 3 months, and we just noticed a really drastic change in his behavior. He was aggressive, unpredictable, uncontrollable. It just kind of felt like our family was falling apart, and so we decided to start researching alternative medication because this wasn't the way that we wanted to live our life.
Right.
We found out about CBD oil through the documentary Weeds with Charlotte's Web.
Right.
Remember sitting in our living room watching it and saying, "Steve, is this available for us?" What? And so I started researching, and it was available, and we were just shocked.
And you live in California, correct?
I do.
So you're living in a legal state.
Yes.
And so that was probably a relief for you as well,
Absolutely.
to know that you could at least seek it out legally for your child. So what happened next?
So we had our first experience was we went to a cannabis doctor, which was a little back alley. You couldn't find it. And the doctor didn't care, wasn't compassionate, just wasn't a good experience, not helpful. I left in tears because I was devastated that there was no compassion in it. Through Facebook, I found Dr. Bonnie Goldstein, and she was just been the biggest blessing to our family. Went to see her.
How did you find Bonnie?
Through Facebook.
Oh, you did?
Yeah,
Okay,
there's support groups on Facebook,
Right.
like Pediatric Cannabis Therapy is a Facebook support group. But I had another mom that reached out to me and said, "You need to find Dr. Goldstein." So my whole life now I need to pay that forward to people because that was given to me.
Right.
Met Dr. Goldstein. She was amazing. I wish all doctors could be like her, to be honest. And she just helped us. She pointed us in the right direction. I learned about it. I started researching it. And then within 10 days, my son started talking. It's just,
Unbelievable. So I have to ask, obviously this is something very new to you and your husband. I think it's new to the majority of Americans who aren't, for some reason entrenched in cannabis medication
Right.
or in the business of researching it or anything else. And so was it a scary process for you to make this decision to try this?
You know what? It wasn't, because you'll do anything for the health of your child. The scary thing for me, my family was 100% supportive, so that's
amazing.
That was the best thing. I had both grandmas on board, grandma, grandpa, my sister, my husband, everybody was supportive.
Wow.
The scary thing was talking to the doctors that weren't supportive,
Right.
and telling the school district. That was a scary conversation.
So how did that go? I'm curious.
Well, it's interesting because everybody knew there was a change. Like, he went from talking to like, "I want more," or "I need help," and using his iPad to talk, to all of a sudden, like within 2 weeks, he was like talking in full sentences. And they were like,
What's happened?
and then of course the teachers are like, "Oh, it's because he's in preschool." And then I ended up calling an IEP because they knew he had seizures and they knew that we were taking him off of Keppra. But they were kind of starting to ask, "Well, what are you doing?" So I was like, "Well, we'll talk about it later." And then when I had the EEG that showed no seizure activities, I called an IEP, and the district nurse was there, and she was actually already familiar, which made the whole thing a lot easier. And they were all supportive. And I said, "I understand that you're mandated reporters, and if you feel like you need to report me, just give me a heads up. I'll handle it." They said, "No, you're using essential oils for your children. We absolutely support you."
That's
So,
amazing.
it's been
That's
awesome.
really amazing. Have you spoken to other parents that have not had that kind of a reaction or a support source when they've tried to use this kind of treatment for their own family members or children?
No, I've kind of just been talking to parents about how to get started.
see.
Everybody's first question is, how much do you give and what do you give?
Right.
And that's the question that I can't really answer because
Same
it's
thing.
so different. For one kid, my daughter, she has autism, and we use the same thing that we used for my son.
Amazing.
of course, we started for seizure control. We didn't start for autism.
Right.
But he started talking. So my daughter's nonverbal, and we've tried for a year before we finally were like, we got to try other strains. We got to figure it out. And we found one that's working for her.
So I would imagine then, I mean, obviously the conference this weekend is made up of people like you, and it also, with their real stories and their real life experiences, and then also they go to the gamut of people like Dr. Bonnie Goldstein, who spoke right before you.
Absolutely.
And so we feel, United Patients Group feels very strongly about education in this area of medical cannabis. And I think one of the things that I'm fascinated about your story is, again, like, how do you know how much to give, as particularly a child? How do you know? And even your first experience with the doctor that was a negative experience until you found Dr. Goldstein. Do you support the fact then that education for physicians out there in legal states, and ideally when it becomes legal, hopefully across the rest of the United States, do you feel that education is paramount with healthcare providers, medical professionals?
It's so important because at this point I've actually had doctors refer people to me.
Amazing.
Which is silly. I'm like, I'm just a mom, but like our developmental pediatrician through Kaiser, I just told him, and I said, before we start, they wanted to put my daughter on Risperdal, which is an antipsychotic, which has so many side effects. And I told him, before I start her on Risperdal, I'm putting her on cannabis, and we're going to try THC. And he said, okay. And so since then, he's had other parents contact me because they chose not to use Risperdal, but as a doctor, he wasn't able to refer.
Right.
So they contact me, and then I kind of show them where to go to get started.
And so that is basically sort of the glitch in the legalities of medical cannabis, particularly in the state of California and elsewhere. So the doctor is able to recommend cannabis but cannot prescribe it. Is that correct?
I'm not sure about our healthcare. I know that they really can't do anything with it. I think they can say, hey, there's this mom and she's trying this. You should contact her and see what she can tell you.
I see. Okay.
But the biggest thing that we had was we had a neurologist that I really enjoyed this. He was really good. He saw my son from birth until 3. He had his seizures and he put him on Keppra, which had severe anger issues with it.
Is that a drug that's almost automatically given to children right off the bat? Or?
I think so, because it has the least amount of long-term side effects, but the big point of it is you could have like behavioral problems. And since he already had autism, it just like made him even not more autistic, but it just made everything come out.
Exacerbated the whole thing.
And when I went to him, and I kind of played a little silly, like, hey, have you heard of Charlotte's Web? What do you think about it? And I believe I was already giving it to him. I wanted help.
And Charlotte's Web is just so that people know what we're talking about. Most of them do know at this point, but it's a CBD oil.
It's a CBD oil. Yeah, it's kind of the main one that's out there that everybody knows about. Right. He was just not on board with it. He didn't understand it. He was very ignorant on it, and he really just shot me down with it. And so I had to turn around and say, well, I got to find somebody else, and I did. And the other doctors can't help me with it, but he's supportive, and he knows Dr. Goldstein, and we kind of just all work in this little system, and it's been
Amazing.
It's been
It's
great.
such a grassroots effort, really, in so many regards. Like the fact that you are a lay person, you're a mother, you're not the medical professional, but you're really teaching something to the medical profession.
It's kind of weird.
Yeah, it is. But I think that you're at the forefront of a movement, obviously, that ideally we're hopeful that everybody eventually, that this will be accessible to everybody, children, adults, elderly,
Right.
but also that we can start to put some of these amazing real life success stories into the research books.
Absolutely.
And really open up that. So how old are your children now?
My son is going to be 6 in June, and my daughter just turned 4.
And how are they doing?
Really, really well. My son, autism is no longer a qualifying placement for the school district.
Oh my gosh.
So it's just other health impairment because he has cerebral palsy and seizures.
Right.
He's
It's
a
amazing.
He's a 6-year-old, so he's fun.
Right.
Talking up a storm. We have seizure control, which is the most important thing.
Yes.
My daughter is 4. She's still nonverbal. I'm praying that one day that will change, but if it doesn't, my hope for my daughter is that she's happy.
Right.
Because seeing your child hitting herself in the face and scratching herself bloody.
Right.
And I told my husband at one point, I was like, if we called 911, they would they'd put her in an institution because she is crazy.
Right.
I thought she was psychotic.
Right.
Then we found the harlequin oil for her, and it's just been, that's
And
a certain strain of cannabis that's actually not, it has equal ratios of both like the THC and the CBD.
Okay.
And so she doesn't necessarily get high from it. She doesn't have seizures, so we don't need it for seizure control. But it's just like that perfect strain for her,
That's amazing.
which was hard to find, but she's doing really, really well on it.
And you also received that harlequin oil through an oil maker in Southern California, is that correct?
Yes, could I say the name of the?
Yes, you can.
Miriam's Hope is the collective that supplies oil for my son. And they were helping me with my daughter, and we just couldn't find the right thing. And so I kept asking, hey, can you get harlequin oil? Can you get harlequin? And it just isn't very popular because it doesn't really do much for most people.
Right.
Well, they found a supplier, and they talked with Dr. Goldstein, and they made it for us. And Casey had such immediate, she just turned a corner. Like, she doesn't hit herself. She's happy. So they're actually making the oil, and they're selling it under Casey's Oil by Miriam's Hope. So they named it after her, which is pretty
that's
amazing.
That's amazing.
It's pretty amazing.
Well, I'm so happy to talk to you.
Thank
I'm
you.
sure that everybody is moved by your story, but also I think that you've established that there's some real proof in the fact that these sorts of treatments they can change lives.
They can.
And little young lives who now have a lot more hope in front of them.
They do.
That's awesome. Thank you, Rebecca.
You're welcome.